Greetings, Ohio Valley. This is Dan Lima with OSU Extension from Belmont County.
And this is Karen Cox from WVU Extension in Ohio County. Thanks for tuning in to Extension Calling, your source for research-based information for the farm, garden, and home. A team of our colleagues from WVU are working to improve health in West Virginia. 1 in 14 West Virginians will be selected to participate in the Mountain State Assessment of Trends in Community Health Survey, or MATCH survey, to gather important health information specific to West Virginians. Why is this important? To improve the health of West Virginians, we need to hear from you. Your feedback will help the state and local communities better address your health needs, increase access to health resources, and better understand the reality of health in your community. Please, if you or someone you know happen to be one of the West Virginians randomly selected to participate in the MATCH survey, I encourage you to take the time to share your health experiences. You can learn more about the MATCH survey by visiting wvmatchsurvey.org. All right, so we are here again in October. We're watching the leaves just beginning to change, and so everyone who enjoys fall is looking forward to watching those bright colors come along, and so it makes us start thinking about our fall preparations. On your tree sides, you might think, oh, hey, the bucks are going to start rubbing, so you want to put a wrap around those smaller trees. But on a cattle side, you want to start thinking about those winter preparations and making sure that your animals are getting the feed that they need to get them to that proper body condition score to help get them through the winter.
That's right, Karen. The leaves are changing. Another September in the books. I think for the most part, most fairs are kind of wrapped up by now.
I think there's just one more, the Black Walnut Festival.
That sounds like a nice one.
Yeah, it's about trees, man. It's got to be nice. It's got to be good.
Yeah. Speaking of black walnuts, those things are falling all over the place about this time of year as well, making a nice mess.
Yeah, if you want to, dye some stuff, the black walnut hulls make a really great dye. It's actually a stain and not a dye. And so you can use it to color those harder to color things like linen, or, you can even use it for a wood stain. But also, of course, black walnuts are a great food source, and a lot of our wildlife enjoy them, and a lot of our people enjoy them too. It's just a lot of work to get to. It's a good way to pass the time and cracking those walnut shells open. But when you look at those nuts falling on the ground, you think, oh, okay, well, hey, there's great food source for livestock, but not so much. Your livestock, you really want to look at your pasture fields right now and see which ones are doing well, which ones maybe need some extra growth time to get back up, because we did have a little cold spell back there, which would have actually sped up the growth of your cool season grasses. So hopefully they picked up.
We're transitioning now, and we got to start thinking about our livestock a little bit differently. Winter's coming upon us. We're kind of looking back and seeing what our production is. A lot of us already sold some calves by now. The ones that were the spring calving group are being sold at the moment. We're looking at how much hay we produce, how much feed we have, and we have to make sure that we have our things squared away. We got our plan for the winter, and then off we go again to another start in the spring. But before we even get to the spring, it's always good about this time to start looking at, you mentioned your livestock, seeing what that body condition score is, because when we think about livestock, the main margin of profit there is going to be your calves. And one of the main deterrents to reproduction for cows is that body condition score. Are your cows too thin? A lot of times we keep the calves on the cows the entire time, going from spring to fall. Sometimes we don't do a whole lot of weaning when we sell them, but that's a whole other conversation. But let's talk about the toll on the cow. In this case, the milk production is one of those very heavy energy requirements. And a lot of times a cow can really be thinned out, and that body condition score can really dip going into wintertime. And if our hay isn't really great quality, it's hard to maintain that weight, or even harder to put on the weight for that cow in order to be rebred. And if that cow doesn't get rebred, then that's your profit loss right there. So, this is the time to kind of analyze your feed, figure out what your plan is for next year. And a lot of that has to do with genetics. Environment plays a huge part of cattle production, but genetics does too. So how often have you stepped back and looked at the genetics of your herd and then thought, I could use a little bit more of this or that in order to, improve performance just by increasing genetics in certain key traits that maybe you're deficient in based on what's available in your herd.
Right. And so things you want to look at would be, your calving weight, right? That's one of the most common genetic factors that farmers look at because that calving weight is going to either help or hinder the ability of that calf to be born and not harm its mama cow, but also, weaning weight. There are genetic traits that help to encourage how that calf grows, and those are actually things that scientists have been studying, knowing from the sire or the dad how his genes are going to be transferred through the mom into the baby. And the measure of those expectations is called the expected progeny difference, or the EPD. And so that's something that you may have heard or may not have heard, but it's basically the prediction of how the kids are going to carry the genetic traits and qualities of the parents, specifically the dad.
Right. That's just a great way to look at certain traits and even quantify as far as the percentage that you could bring into a herd based on what kind of bull you use. And you can do that by buying a bull. You can do that by buying semen and doing AI, artificial insemination. So there's various ways to introduce genetics into your herd. But a lot of bulls do have genetic analysis associated with them. And even when we're talking about artificial insemination, where you're just buying semen, a lot of people think, hey, how expensive is AI? And really the key there is how expensive is the semen that you're buying to AI with, which kind of brings us to the point where genetics is a very important factor, and it can be a very expensive investment depending on what you're looking for and how rapid you want these changes to be. So one of the things that Karen was talking about was birthing weight. Calving ease is something that we look at that is associated with that weight of the calf. And this is a great example because it kind of hits the point where you have to balance things out, right? Obviously, the weight of the calf sold at the auction barn or wherever you're selling it is going to correlate to how much money you make, other than the market and all kinds of economic factors. But the heavier the calf, typically, the more you're going to walk away with. Now, the flip side of that is if the weight of that calf gets too big at birth, then what is the viability of the calves? Like, what percentage of the calves survive the birthing, or even your cows? Could that take a toll on the cow? And could you have cow losses during that calving event? So you don't want to go too high because now you're looking at the problem with viability of the calf or the cow. So you have to balance things out.
Right. You don't want to have to be out there helping every cow have her calf. You want to be able to let nature take its course and have as few assisted calvings as possible. And so when you're looking at your calving ease, EPD, you're going to be looking at the percent of unassisted calvings in heifers, which is a cow that hasn't had a calf before. So, as a general rule, your higher calving ease values indicate greater calving ease by the sire, which is especially important when you're breeding your heifers.
Right. So then we go into birthing weight, which I think is very correlated with calving ease. There's weaning weight now. So now you're looking at, when you're comparing across the board, expressed in pounds, the weaning weight would be a predictor of a sire's ability to transmit weaning growth. So how fast it can put on weight to the point of weaning. There's yearling weight, which correlates to yearling. So how much weight has it put on to the yearling mark? So does that rate of gain kind of fluctuate? By keeping records, you're going to be able to see this. So would you like to put in some genetics that would increase maybe weight gain towards the end, at the yearling level, at the weaning level?
Right.
And then there's just residual average daily gains where you average it all out and you see, okay, what is the efficiency of my calf in putting on weight?
Right. And that's going to translate into not only the weight at sale, but it's also going to kind of correlate into your feed efficiency as well.
Right. So that's just based on calving weight, right? And we did kind of start off just saying that is a factor that no one's going to argue is important, especially when you're selling calves. But there's also things you need to look at. What's the fertility of your bull? What's the percentage success rate you have for cows that aren't open? Do you have a lot of open cows? Is that bull fertile? You can look at EPD scores for fertility as well. And not only the fertility of the animal itself, but now if we're looking at management, what is the docility of the calves, the cow, the bull? Do you want to put some behavioral genetics in the herd as well so that you're not putting yourself in a dangerous situation, or you've noticed that the offspring of a certain bull are a little bit more aggressive than other bulls? Docility is another factor of EPDs that you can look at. Now, going on to the maternal side, you have the heifer pregnancy, calving ease on the maternal side. Also, maternal milk production. Does that cow produce enough milk to really fatten up that calf? Or does she dry up fairly quickly? You can get to a point also where, again, you're balancing things out, where if she produces too much milk, is it harder to get that weight back on her? If you keep breeding for one thing, you're going to find that you're going to get in trouble in other areas. So you really have to balance things out as far as what you're looking for and the best way to do it. There is going to be a mature weight EPD, mature height, and a cow energy value that is expressed in dollar savings per cow per year. There are certain traits that are very complicated, and that one takes into effect the efficiency, how much meat is produced based on the breed of the animal, things like that. So there are EPD scores that are very calculated and very projected in terms of what you see and what you value. And then there are things that are more easily quantified and measured.
Yeah, and I just want to throw out there that EPD scores aren't just for cattle. They have EPDs for swine and for sheep. And so if you aren't a cattle breeder, then, you still should be paying attention to these things because a lot of these characteristics have been measured and are a verifiable trait. And so if you are using AI or artificial insemination for your animals, then you can look into these different traits and purchase the right kind of semen for the traits you are looking for, regardless of whether you're a cattle producer or a swine producer or a sheep producer.
Yeah, and that goes all the way to the carcass of the animal. So it's not in your face and it's not something you think about all the time. And it's not what you're really basing the value of the sale on necessarily. But
But your
depending on,
buyer might.
well, what I'm saying is depending on how you market, right? So you could look at things like carcass weight, marbling potential, the ribeye area, the fat thickness, and looking at these carcass values, depending on how you market your animal, even at the calf stage, you could potentially increase your revenue based on how you market that animal. So it's not only the fattest calves that get the most money, but if you market correctly, you can look at carcass traits that you've brought into the herd. You can look at disease resistance. What is the health of the animal, and the ribeye area. Some of the more selective cuts. Do your calves, do they have a potential to have those really good quality cuts in the carcass? Is the marbling really well done? And that could be a breed thing. That could be very specific genetics within the breed. And a lot of these traits can come from something called hybrid vigor. that is just completely different. And it's a phenomenon that happens in genetics where if you breed two backgrounds that are fairly distant from one another, you get this enhanced production that seems to be associated with that diversity of genetics. It's not necessarily traits that you're selecting for and markers that you're looking for in the genetics of the animal, but just combining two different types of genetics, you get hybrid vigor. And that could be as high as a 10% increase in various traits that we're looking at, even through the EPD map. So there's just so many ways to look at production and figure out game plans to enhance certain traits that you're looking for. Weight gain is one of them that we see in hybrid vigor. We even see maternal instincts in hybrid vigor that can
Mhm.
be increased. And when you have increased maternal instincts, then you have less of a chance of a calf to be rejected by the mother or even possibly take on calves that have been rejected because of twins, so that now all of a sudden, because of that maternal instinct increase that you have in a certain animal, she'll take on a calf that might not normally happen. That maternal instinct was lower.
Yeah, and maternal instinct is also going to lead to calf health because if you have a mama cow who rejects that calf, even for just a couple of hours or a day, there you're losing the essential colostrum that she's making in that first 24 hours. And that's going to lead to the long term health and immunity or the immune system of that calf. And so that first 24 hours is critical. So you really need to have mama cows that, aren't going to reject their babies. Even if you can convince her and coerce her to nurse that calf, that first rejection period is really going to make that calf suffer. And its total weight gain, its immunity, its total overall health is going to be impacted.
Yeah, so I guess when you're looking at genetics of your herd and you're trying to figure out what's missing or where are my major problem areas, you can get genetic analysis of certain bulls. You can go the AI route, you can actually buy the animal, but you also can't just focus on one thing, especially when you're looking at the genetic analysis of that animal, the EPD scores across the board for a certain animal, for a certain bull that you're trying to increase a certain trait with. Balance things out, but try to start tackling those problem areas. And then you might find that your production, your operation might increase a lot of profit. And those profits might not necessarily be overnight, but it's something that you can constantly improve on. And in the long term, you might see some major benefits just by good record keeping. I would challenge anyone that doesn't keep records to understand where the problem areas are.
Hmm.
And you might if they're bad enough, but certain things might be subtle. You might find ways to improve those subtle problems that might not be as transparent as other problems.
Yeah, and actually, West Virginia has a bull test program. It's like a cooperative effort between producers and the Wardensville farm, wherein they'll measure growth and fertility, body composition, feed intake for these bulls so they can give that information back to the farm and they'll know what the potential characteristics that could be passed on would be. So it's an interesting program, and if you want to learn more about it, contact the Wardensville Bull Test Sale. COVID-19 vaccination protects you and those around you. When communities are vaccinated, fewer people get sick. Community immunity begins with each one of us.
So I know we kind of highlighted body condition scores a little bit, but not everything can be completely the responsibility of the genetics. There are certain physiological issues that can happen, and I don't care like how fertile an animal is in terms of the EPD scores. If that animal's body condition score, the way we talked about, remember early on in the show, we're like, hey, we're going into winter. We're trying to rebreed this animal. We just sold the calf. If that body condition score is lower, we'll say the threes and fours as opposed to the five, six, and sevens. So the three would be a very thin animal,
Mhm.
not fat over the brisket, backbone still visible. So if you're seeing that backbone and that's a cow that really nursed a fat calf, even, it's going to be hard to rebreed her if her body condition score isn't going up. And going into winter is one of the hardest times to put that weight on. So let's not just focus on genetics, and let's focus on management as well in order to get a good read on where the problem areas are. Again, a good cow to rebreed would be a body condition score of 6 or 7. So we're talking about where you can see the back ribs and tail slightly rounded and spongy to touch, fat deposits visible on the brisket. So we're talking about a meaty looking cow. When you get to body condition score 7, 8, and 9, 9 being obese, you're starting to see a fatter cow on the 7. But again, you don't want to go overboard either. An obese cow is going to be hard to breed as well. But the very thin cow, rebreeding is difficult. And that is because milk production can be such a demanding thing. That cow can really lose body condition if that calf is on her way too long and way too late in the season, along with feed quality. If the feed quality is low, there's not a lot of protein, there's not a lot of energy, or if there's just not enough feed to go around, putting on that weight is just physiologically impossible.
Yeah. And, if you're not really familiar with judging of livestock, I'm not talking about in the ring judging. I'm talking about being able to look at an animal and see where the important locations are. So being able to know where the brisket is and know how it should look, to be able to identify whether or not an animal is a body condition score of 4 or 6. If you're not familiar with those things, I really encourage you to reach out and work with your local extension agent to learn more about that, because having that eye, to develop that eye, is really important, and it's going to make your job a lot easier. We're here talking about genetics, and of course everyone immediately jumps in and thinks blood tests, but that's not really true. You can see genetics. You can see someone who has blonde hair. You can see someone who has brown eyes. Those are genetic traits. You don't have to do a blood test to see what those are. And it's the same with your livestock. You can see if a livestock has a good frame, if it's got a good amount of muscling to it, if it's structurally sound. You can see whether it's going to meet the needs of your market that you're selling into. But if you haven't had the opportunity to develop that eye, you could say, well, it looks like a healthy animal, and it may be missing some of those key characteristics that your buyer is looking for. So work with your buyer, work with your extension office, and get yourself that training that you need to be able to identify by sight the traits. Now, obviously, you can't identify maternal instincts by looking at an animal unless she's nursing a calf right then.
But you know what, Karen? You can figure that out by having the records of what cow calved what,
hmm
and is that calf viable?
Records, records, records.
Yeah. So one of the things, we keep talking about genetics from the bull standpoint, but you can also call out certain negative traits out of your herd as well. So let's say you have a cow that is great as far as breeding goes, but it's a very aggressive cow. The demeanor of that cow is just hard to work with. It costs you money as far as time and effort it takes to make sure that you're safe. You can call out negative traits as well. So it's not an overnight thing, even though when you're looking at EPD scores on the bull side, you might think it's a quick fix, but you have to call out negative traits, bring in traits that you want, and then it's a constant balance. Like, make sure you're not losing something that you had just because you're not selecting for it, just because you're not looking at it. But I think the demeanor of the animals is a very important thing to look at and to remove from the herd. Maybe at one point it was fine, but now it's becoming dangerous and very difficult.
Yeah, that aggressive trait should be bred out. Now, you do need some aggressiveness in there. There's always an extreme that you want to avoid. You don't want a completely docile animal because they need to be able to protect themselves while they're out in the pasture. If there's a predator, they would need to be able to have some protective instincts. But if you're looking at an animal that's overly aggressive to work with, that's always fighting you, that's really just not worth the time. And it's not worth the danger involved with working with these large animals. You got 1,400 pounds of beef running at you. That's a scary day.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are important things to look at, is the demeanor of the animal. And we talked earlier about maternal instincts, that we're like, yes, you've got to go for good maternal instincts. That's important. But you can also have maternal instincts that are too strong. If she's not going to let you near that calf to vaccinate it or tag it or do what you need to do to manage your herd, then that's too strong of a maternal instinct. And maybe you need to back that down a little bit.
That's a good point. We're looking at genetics, so genotype, right? But then there's something called phenotype. It's what we physically see.
Right.
The key thing that goes from genotype to phenotype is environment. So a lot of times we're looking at these EPD scores, and they might not necessarily be in the environment that we're in. It could be a lot warmer environment, different diet. There's a lot of differences that could be there, and we're not going to see the same exact thing. I'm sure it'll be similar, but it might not be as strong or as weak as you predicted. And that is because of the environment. So if you can stay local, I guess, if you see an operation that's similar to yours and you're looking at certain traits, that has value too. A cow that has a certain performance in a certain environment, and then you put it in something completely different. Just because you buy a great cow down in Georgia doesn't mean it's going to perform the same in Ohio. That's kind of my point.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
But if your neighbor's cow that's a similar type of grass that you have performs really well and you admire it, and maybe that would be something that you could purchase from them.
If your neighbors have a bull calf, then maybe you could purchase that calf off of them and bring those genetic traits into your herd.
Yeah. So definitely take the environment in consideration when you're looking at genetics and traits and breeding in certain things and calling out other things that you don't want. It's all related. It's all tied together, but it is a big balancing act and trying to figure out, not only are you gaining something, but you're not losing something else. But you can't forget the basics. Body condition scores. I don't care how high that EPD score is in fertility. If that body condition score is low, pregnancy potential is going to go down.
Yep, everything starts with a healthy animal. There is no amount of genetic strength and quality that can counterbalance not having a good, healthy animal. With that, we will catch you next week. Top health experts agree that COVID-19 vaccines are safe, effective, and trusted. Visit vaccinate.wv.gov or contact your local health department. Thanks for listening to Extension Calling. This show is a collaboration between OSU Belmont County Extension Educator Dan Lima and WVU Ohio County Extension Agent Karen Cox. If you'd like a transcript of this show, contact us at the office. Also, let us know if you enjoy the show by ranking us on your podcast app.